blood tasting like cheap copper pennies, and exhaust fumes. That's my final memory, crushed against the asphalt by a tabloid reporter's van, clutching the battered flash drive that proved I wrote every single word of Vanessa's best-selling empire. I died a fraud, a national laughingstock, while she stood on a stage in a custom gown, accepting her third literary award and dedicating it to her troubled, deceitful friend. Then I woke up, 5 years earlier, sitting on my lumpy thrift store futon, staring at the exact blank Word document that started the nightmare. This time, I'm keeping the keyboard. Cold sweat glued my faded band t-shirt to my spine. My lungs heaved, dragging in air that smelled of stale espresso and rain-dampened brick, not sterile hospital sheets, and burning rubber. My hands flew to my chest, fingers frantically tracing the space over my ribs. Whole, unbroken, no crushing weight, no blinding agony, no flash of headlights searing through the rainy night. My phone vibrated on the wobbly coffee table. The screen was cracked down the middle, a spiderweb fracture I hadn't seen since I finally upgraded 3 years ago. I snatched it up my thumb, swiping across the shattered glass. Tuesday, October 14th, 5 years ago. I dropped the phone like it was radioactive. It clattered against a half-empty mug of cold coffee, sloshing brown liquid onto a stack of printed manuscript pages. The Obsidian Crown by Vanessa Vance. No, wait, not Vance. Just Vanessa right now. She hadn't adopted her pretentious pen name yet. Footsteps pounded up the narrow wooden stairs outside my apartment. Heavy, rushed familiar. A key jammed into my lock. Only one other person had a key to this miserable studio. The door swung inward, hitting the wall with a dull thud. Vanessa burst in a whirlwind of cashmere designer perfume and manufactured panic. She looked impossibly young. Her blonde hair wasn't bleached to that icy, unapproachable platinum yet. It was a soft, honeyed blonde. Her face was free of the subtle fillers she'd get after her first royalty check cleared. "Jade, tell me you're awake," she gasped, slamming the door behind her and leaning against it dramatically. "Felix is demanding the first 3 chapters by Friday. Friday. Jade, my agent is going to drop me before he even signs me." I stared at her. Just stared. My mind overlaid the image of this panicked, fresh-faced 22-year-old with the cold, dead-eyed woman who would eventually go on national television and tearfully explain how I had stalked her, stolen her drafts, and tried to ruin her life out of jealousy. The woman who watched me lose my career, my apartment, and my reputation, all to protect the secret that she couldn't string 2 coherent sentences together. Jade. Vanessa waved a manicured hand in front of my face. "Hello, Earth," to my savior. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I am the ghost," I thought. "Your ghostwriter. And I died for your sins. I forced my vocal cords to work. I'm fine. Just a bad dream." Vanessa exhaled a loud, self-important sigh and pushed off the door. She tossed her expensive leather tote onto my meager pile of clean laundry. "Well, wake up. We have a crisis." I tried to write the opening scene like we talked about, but it's just not flowing. The dialogue feels clunky. The world building is, I don't know, boring. You just have a magic touch with this stuff. Can you please just do a heavy pass on it? She pulled her sleek silver laptop from her tote and shoved it into my hands. The metal was cold against my palms. I looked down at the screen. Chapter 1. Princess Avelina woke up in her large bed. She looked out the window. The sky was very blue. "I hate being a princess," she said sadly to her maid. "It is so hard." I felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up in the back of my throat. This was the raw material of the empire. This utter, unredeemable garbage. In my previous life, I had taken this pathetic paragraph and spent 30 hours weaving it into a lush, intricate tapestry of political intrigue and dark magic. I built the entire magic system. I created the brooding antagonist that spawned a million fan fictions. I named the kingdoms, mapped the geography, and gave Vanessa a voice that critics would later call a revelation in modern fantasy. I did it because she was my best friend, because she promised we'd split the advance, because she promised she'd introduce me to her agent once this book took off paving the way for my own original novels. She lied about all of it. She took the manuscript, registered the copyright solely in her name, signed a $1 million contract, and threw me a bone of $10,000, claiming the publisher wouldn't allow a co-author credit for marketing reasons. By the time I realized the trap I was in, she had the money, the lawyers, and the platform. I had nothing but my own naive text messages, which her legal team twisted into delusional obsession. "Jade, you're spacing out again," Vanessa said, her voice tightening with impatience. She perched on the edge of my futon, crossing her legs. "Look, I know it needs work. That's why you're my secret weapon. If you can just clean up the prose, make it sound like you know a real book, I'll buy us dinner for a week. Sushi, the good place. Sushi, my life, my intellectual property, my sanity, traded for raw tuna and a smile." I looked at her face, the expectant, entitled expression of someone who has never been told no in her entire life. She fully expected me to crack my knuckles, pull an all-nighter, and hand her a masterpiece by dawn. "Vanessa," I said, my voice shockingly steady, dropping the laptop onto the cushion next to her, "I'm not doing it." Silence stretched tight across the cramped apartment, thick enough to choke on. The distant rumble of a subway train vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the cracked mug on the table. Vanessa didn't move. She just stared at the laptop lying between us, then slowly raised her eyes to mine. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in a knot of genuine confusion. "What do you mean you're not doing it?" She laughed, a short, breathy sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Jade, don't joke right now. I'm having a literal panic attack here. My chest is tight. Do you want me to fail?" It was the classic Vanessa maneuver. Guilt served, immediately garnished with a sudden, mysterious physical ailment. In the past, the mere suggestion that I was causing her distress would have had me apologizing and typing until my fingers bled. "I'm not joking," I said, stepping back from the futon and crossing my arms. I felt hyper-aware of my body, the solid ground beneath my feet. I was alive. I was 24 again. The world was open. "I can't rewrite your book." "Rewrite?" She spat the word out like it tasted foul. The honeyed warmth in her tone vanished, replaced by a defensive, brittle edge. "Nobody is asking you to rewrite anything. I just asked for a copy edit, a structural polish. You want me to write the book, Vanessa? Let's call it what it is." I kept my voice flat, devoid of the emotion she fed on. "The draft you just handed me is a skeletal outline. If I touch it, I'll be generating 90% of the content, and I don't have the time." "Time. What else do you have to do?" Her gaze flicked around my studio, taking in the peeling paint, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the cheap ramen packets piled in the open pantry. It was a calculated look designed to remind me of my place. She was the one with the wealthy parents in the suburbs, the trust fund that paid her rent, the connections in the publishing world. I was the scholarship kid, working 2 barista shifts just to keep the lights on. My own writing. I lied smoothly. Well, it was a half lie. I fully intended to write my own books now, but not the one she was thinking of. I'm entering a short story competition. The deadline is Friday. I need to focus on my own career. Vanessa stood up. The air in the room shifted. The mask of the helpless, distressed best friend dissolved completely. Her posture straightened, her shoulders squaring. Your own career, she repeated, her voice dripping with sudden, venomous condescension. Jade, be realistic. You write nice little character studies, but you don't know how to sell a concept. I have the platform. I have Felix waiting for this. If we pull this off, I told you, I'll bring you up with me, like you did with the articles for the College Lit magazine. I shot back the memories of past slights surfacing effortlessly. The ones I wrote and you put your name on, promising you'd introduce me to the editor-in-chief. You never did. A flash of genuine alarm crossed her face, quickly masked by indignation. She hadn't expected me to bring that up. That was different. The magazine needed a recognized face. I was the sorority president. It got more eyes on the work. It got more eyes on you, I corrected quietly, and this book will do the same. So no, I'm out. You're going to have to write The Obsidian Crown yourself. She snatched her laptop off the futon, clutching it to her chest, like a shield. Her face was flushed, ugly red splotches blooming on her cheeks. You're jealous. That's what this is. You're jealous that I got a meeting with a literary agent, and you're still pouring lattes. You want to sabotage me. I want you to leave Vanessa. I walked over to the door and pulled it open. The drafty hallway air rushed in. She marched to the door, stopping just at the threshold. She looked me up and down, her eyes, cold and hard. This was the Vanessa I knew, the one who had watched me bleed out in the press. You're making a huge mistake, Jade, she whispered, her voice a razor blade wrapped in silk. You are nobody. Without me, you're going to rot in this pathetic apartment forever. When I'm on the bestseller list, don't come crawling back asking for a handout. I won't, I said. She stepped out into the hall. I slammed the door shut and engaged the deadbolt. The metallic click echoed in the quiet room. I leaned against the wood, my knees suddenly shaking. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving me weak, but wildly, fiercely alive. I had done it. I had cut the cord. But as I walked over to my own desk and woke up my battered desktop computer, a cold realization settled in my gut. Vanessa was desperate. She had promised an agent a masterpiece by Friday, and she possessed none of the talent required to produce it. She wouldn't just give up. She knew my passwords. She knew where I kept my notebooks. If she couldn't bully me into writing it, she would find a way to take what she needed. I opened a new document. My fingers hovered over the keys. I wasn't just going to write my own book. I was going to write a trap. If she wanted to steal a manuscript, I'd leave one right where she could find it. A manuscript embedded with poison pills, undeniable proof of authorship, and a plot so tightly wound around my own life that anyone who claimed it would hang themselves with the narrative. I smiled the expression, feeling sharp and dangerous in the empty room. Let her steal it. Let her publish it. Let her climb all the way to the top of the pedestal. It just makes the fall that much more entertaining. Wednesday morning arrived, with the biting chill of late autumn seeping through the poorly insulated windows of my apartment. I didn't mind the cold. It kept me sharp. My fingers flew across the sticky keys of my desktop keyboard, the rhythmic clacking filling the quiet room. I was crafting a masterpiece, not a fantasy epic about princesses and magic systems. That was the old me, the naive girl, who died on a rainy asphalt road. This was something darker. This was bait. I knew Vanessa's methods intimately. She wasn't a hacker. She wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was a scavenger who relied on proximity and entitlement. In my past life, we shared a cloud drive folder. We called it Brainstorms, a collaborative space where I did all the actual writing, and she occasionally left comments like, "Make the guy hotter." I hadn't revoked her access yet. That would have been a rookie mistake. If I locked her out completely, she would panic and find another victim. Or worse, try to physically break into my apartment. I needed her to steal my trap precisely on her deadline. The decoy manuscript was brilliant in its deceit. I titled it Crown of Ash. I kept the superficial elements she demanded: the royal courts, the brooding love interest, the aesthetic of dark academia, mixed with high fantasy. It was exactly what her prospective agent Felix was expecting. But underneath the velvet and steel, I wove a very specific, undeniable DNA into the text. I named the minor villainous factions after the street names of my childhood neighborhood, a place Vanessa had never visited and couldn't possibly locate on a map. I hid an acrostic in the opening paragraph of every 5th chapter, read the first letter of every sentence, and it spelled out my full legal name, Jade Gallagher, and my social security number. But the crown jewel of my sabotage was the magic system itself. It was based entirely on a highly obscure, localized folklore from my grandfather's hometown in rural Ireland. I didn't just write a story. I built a cryptographic puzzle that only I possessed the cipher for. By Thursday afternoon, my eyes burned and my back ached, but the first 20,000 words were done. I saved the document. Then I deliberately dragged it into our shared Brainstorms folder. I watched the little sync icon spin until it turned into a solid green check mark. The bait was in the water. I pushed away from the desk, my joints popping in protest, and prepared for my evening shift at the coffee shop. Grinding beans and foaming milk felt wonderfully mundane. It grounded me. It reminded me that I was a real person, living in the real world, not just a ghost haunting Vanessa's shadow. The bell above the cafe door jingled at exactly 6:15 p.m. I didn't need to look up from the espresso machine to know who it was. The sharp clack of designer boots against the linoleum was a dead giveaway. Vanessa ordered a non-fat, half-calf caramel macchiato. She didn't look at me when she ordered. She stared straight ahead at the pastry case, her face tight, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She looked haggard, a stark contrast to her usual polished veneer. The deadline was tomorrow. The pressure was eating her alive. "Name for the order?" I asked, keeping my voice deadpan. She finally flicked her gaze toward me. Her eyes were venomous, but there was a flicker of something else beneath the anger. Panic. Raw, unfiltered panic. "You know my name, Jade." "Store policy," I replied smoothly, grabbing a Sharpie. "Have to write a name on the cup." She snatched a $20 bill from her wallet and slapped it onto the counter. "Keep the change. And don't play games with me. You think you're making a point, but you're just being petty." "I'm pouring coffee," I said, handing her the receipt. "Your drink will be ready at the end of the bar." I turned away, focusing on the rhythmic hiss of the steam wand. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb aggressively swiping across the screen. She was checking her emails. Then she opened the Cloud Drive app. I saw the exact moment she found it. Her posture shifted. The rigid tension in her shoulders melted, replaced by a sudden, predatory stillness. Her eyes widened, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the cafe. She had found Crown of Ash. She didn't know it was a trap. She only saw salvation wrapped in a neatly formatted Word document. Vanessa shoved her phone back into her coat pocket, her breathing suddenly shallow. She didn't even wait for her macchiato. She turned on her heel and practically sprinted out the door, the bell jingling wildly in her wake. I dumped the steamed milk down the drain and wiped the counter with a damp rag. A slow, dark smile stretched across my face. The hook was set. Now, all I had to do was let her pull herself under. When my shift ended at midnight, I walked back to my apartment through the crisp night air. The city felt different tonight. It felt alive, pulsing with potential. I unlocked my door, dropped my apron on the floor, and immediately went to my computer. I opened the cloud drive. The Brainstorms folder was empty. She hadn't just copied it. She had moved the entire file, deleting it from the shared space to cover her tracks, assuming I hadn't saved a local backup. It was a remarkably stupid move, driven by sheer desperation and arrogance. She truly believed I was too incompetent to secure my own work. I opened my secure encrypted local drive. There sat the original file, time-stamped, watermarked, and safely backed up to 2 external hard drives and a private server. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor casting long shadows across my cramped bedroom. Sleep would come easy tonight. Friday arrived with a torrential downpour, the rain lashing against my window pane like tiny, angry fingernails. In my previous life, this exact rainstorm had been the backdrop to my death. I remember the slick roads, the blinding glare of headlights, the sudden crushing impact. Today the rain just sounded like applause. I spent the morning running errands. I went to the post office and mailed a physical copy of the manuscript to myself via registered mail, a poor man's copyright, but a legally admissible timestamp nonetheless. I also registered the work officially with the U.S. Copyright Office, paying the expedited fee with money I had skimmed from my grocery budget. I was not leaving a single loophole unclosed. Every legal avenue Vanessa's lawyers had used to destroy me in the past was currently being bricked up and cemented shut. At 2 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Just wanted to let you know that Felix loved the draft. He called it a revelation. We're signing the representation paperwork on Monday. Guess I didn't need your help after all. Have a nice life, Jade. I stared at the screen, a cold laugh escaping my lips. She actually did it. She submitted the decoy. Not only that she was arrogant enough to gloat about it, providing me with written evidence that she claimed ownership of the draft on this specific date. I took a screenshot of the message, uploaded it to my secure server, and printed a hard copy for my growing physical dossier. The weekend crawled by. I worked my shifts at the cafe, served lattes to exhausted students and grumpy commuters, and spent my evenings mapping out my actual career. Without Vanessa draining my time and creative energy, my mind felt incredibly sharp. I started outlining a completely new project, a gritty sci-fi thriller that was miles away from the fantasy genre. I wanted a clean break. When I finally stepped into the publishing arena, I wanted absolutely no stylistic overlap with the garbage fire Vanessa was about to ignite. Monday morning, the publishing world shifted on its axis. I was wiping down tables at the cafe when my phone started vibrating relentlessly in my apron pocket. I ignored it until my break. When I finally retreated to the dingy staff room and checked the screen, I had 14 missed calls and a dozen frantic texts, mostly from mutual acquaintances from college. I opened the top text from a girl named Sarah, who ran a popular book review blog. "Jade, have you seen Publishers Weekly? Vanessa just sold a book in a massive preempt, 7 figures. Everyone is losing their minds." I navigated to the trade website. There, it was dominating the front page. A glossy, professionally shot photo of Vanessa looking perfectly disheveled and intellectual, framed by the headline, "Debut Sensation, Vanessa Croft, lands 7-figure, deal for fantasy, epic, crown of ash." The article detailed how her agent Felix had sent the manuscript out on a Friday afternoon, and by Sunday night, 3 major publishing houses were locked in a bidding war. The winning editor was quoted calling it a fiercely original voice with world building that rivals the genre's titans. Croft is a prodigy. I read the quote twice, savoring the bitter irony. They were praising my world building. They were paying $1 million for my localized Irish folklore and my childhood street names. And Vanessa, the prodigy, was currently popping champagne, utterly oblivious to the fact that she had just signed a legally binding contract guaranteeing she wrote every single word of a manuscript laced with my Social Security number. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was an incoming call from Vanessa. I let it ring 5 times before answering. "Hello, Jade." Her voice was a screech of manufactured joy, pitched so high it hurt my eardrums. Did you see the news I told you? I told you I could do it." She was drunk, not just on alcohol, but on victory. She was calling to rub my face in the dirt to validate her theft by proving that she had won and I had lost. "I saw," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Congratulations, Vanessa. 7 figures. That's a lot of sushi." She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "It's a whole new life, Jade. I'm moving to Manhattan. Felix is already talking about film rights. And you know what the best part is? I did it all by myself. I pushed through the block and I created magic." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She was actually beginning to believe her own delusion. In her mind, the fact that she had pressed send on the email to Felix made her the author. "Well," I said softly, staring at a stain on the staff room wall, "I hope you enjoy the spotlight. Just remember, a 7-figure advance comes with a lot of scrutiny. The edits are going to be brutal." There was a tiny beat of silence on the line, a microsecond of hesitation, as reality briefly pierced her bubble of champagne. "I'm not worried about edits," she snapped, her voice losing a fraction of its forced cheer. "I know this world inside and out. It's my creation." "Of course it is," I agreed smoothly. "Good luck, Vanessa. Don't call me again." I hung up before she could respond and blocked her number. I didn't need to hear from her anymore. The machinery was in motion. The publishing house would announce a release date soon. Advanced reader copies would go out to critics. The hype train would accelerate to breakneck speeds. And I would sit back, sip my cheap coffee, and wait for the exact right moment to throw myself onto the tracks and derail the whole damn thing. Winter dissolved into a miserable gray spring, taking the initial shockwave of Vanessa's $1 million deal with it. Publishing moves at the speed of shifting tectonic plates. Contracts require signatures, lawyers haggle over foreign rights, and release dates are plotted 18 months in advance to appease the almighty supply chain. For the rest of the world, Vanessa Croft was a Cinderella story waiting in the wings. For me, she was a rat chewing its own leg off in a trap of my design. I kept my head down. My shifts at the cafe paid the rent, and my nights belonged entirely to my own mind. Stripped of the parasitic drain of ghostwriting, my creativity returned with a violent, beautiful force. I wasn't writing fantasy anymore. I built a claustrophobic, hard-boiled sci-fi thriller set on a decaying orbital station. No princesses, no magic. Just grease vacuum seals and human desperation. I poured every ounce of my residual anger into the metallic corridors of that station, crafting something raw and undeniably mine. By May, I had a polished manuscript. By June, I had a modest but respectable literary agent who believed in it. Meanwhile, the cracks in Vanessa's gilded facade were starting to show visible only to those who knew where to look. I got my updates through Leo. He was a 19-year-old barista I worked Thursday, closing shifts with, but more importantly, he was an unpaid intern at one of the big literary scouting agencies. Leo thrived on industry gossip. He inhaled it like oxygen, mostly to survive the soul-crushing tedium of formatting spreadsheets. "You want to hear a massive train wreck?" Leo asked one rainy Tuesday, wiping down the espresso machine while I restocked the pastry case. That 7-figure debut, everyone was screaming about Crown of Ash. I kept my hand steady, rotating a blueberry muffin so the crumble faced outward. "What about it?" My boss had drinks with the assistant editor handling it. Apparently, the author is a complete nightmare. Leo snickered, leaning against the counter. They sent her the developmental edit letter 2 months ago. It wasn't even that bad, just standard stuff. Fix the pacing in Act 2, clarify how the blood magic cost works, flesh out the political motivations of the northern factions. And, I prompted, tossing an expired croissant into the waste bin. And she refuses to touch it. Leo said, his eyes gleaming with second-hand schadenfreude. Total diva behavior. She sends back furious emails, saying her vision is perfect, as is, and altering the structure will ruin the artistic integrity. But the assistant editor thinks she just doesn't know how to fix it, like she's physically incapable of executing the revisions. They asked her for a supplementary lore Bible for the copy editors, and she ghosted them for 3 weeks. I turned my back to Leo to hide the feral sharp smile cutting across my face. She wasn't being a diva. She was suffocating. She couldn't clarify the blood magic cost because she didn't invent it. She couldn't flesh out the northern factions because those factions were based on the petty HOA disputes of my childhood, street heavily disguised in pseudo-Gaelic. If she moved one structural pillar, the entire ceiling would collapse on her head, and she lacked the architectural knowledge to rebuild it. The desperation finally breached my physical perimeter a week later. I came home from a double shift, my feet aching, smelling faintly of stale milk and roasted beans. A thick manila envelope lay on the scuffed hardwood floor just inside my door. It had been shoved through the narrow gap at the bottom. No return address, no postage. I locked the deadbolt, dropped my keys on the counter, and tore the envelope open. A thick stack of crisp $100 bills slid out, landing with a heavy muffled thud against the wood. Beneath the cash was a single sheet of heavy stock paper. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, stripped of all its usual loopy pretension. "Jade, please, I am drowning. The editor wants a complete rewrite of chapters 12 through 20. I can't do it. I've tried. I'll give you this $10,000 right now in cash. I'll give you another $40,000 when the second half of the advance clears. Just fix the pacing. Just tell me how the magic system connects to the epilogue. They are threatening to delay publication. I am begging you. Call me." I stared at the money. $10,000. It was exactly the amount she had thrown at me in my past life after stealing my empire. The symmetry of it made my stomach churn. 5 years ago, I would have taken it. I would have paid off my student loans, upgraded my laptop, and sold my soul for a fraction of what it was worth, convincing myself I was lucky to get the scraps. I picked up the cash, counting it slowly. Exactly 100 bills. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I didn't even burn the letter. I placed the cash and the note into a sterile plastic Ziploc bag and locked it inside my fireproof safe alongside the registered copyright certificate. It was no longer money. It was Exhibit A. Vanessa was entirely on her own. She would have to force the publisher to print the decoy draft exactly as it was, warts and all, terrifying the editors with her sheer stubbornness. She would have to bluff her way through the copy edits blindly, approving changes she didn't understand. She was building her castle on a fault line, and I was holding the detonator. All I had to do was wait for the grand opening. September brought the harvest. Crown of Ash dropped into the world with the kind of manufactured aggressive marketing blitz reserved for blockbuster movies. You couldn't walk into a bookstore, open a browser, or wait for a subway train without seeing Vanessa's face. The publisher had pushed all their chips to the center of the table. They bought billboard space in Times Square. They secured end-cap displays at every major retailer. I walked into an independent bookstore downtown on release day, wearing an oversized hoodie and a beanie, my collar pulled up against the autumn chill. A massive cardboard standee of Vanessa greeted me at the entrance. She looked ethereal, wrapped in a velvet cloak, staring thoughtfully off into the distance. I picked up a hardback copy. The jacket was gorgeous, embossed with metallic gold foil. The book possessed physical weight, a dense tactile reality that made my breath catch in my throat for a fraction of a second. I flipped it open, ignoring the gushing blurbs from established authors who were clearly doing a favor for her powerful agent. I turned to Chapter 5. Page 42. My eyes scanned the first letter of each sentence in the opening paragraph. J ust beyond the ridge. A always the shadows crept. D spite the cold. E very breath hurt. I flipped to Chapter 10. Page 98. G-ray clouds gathered. A ellies were scarce. L ong before the dawn. The acrostic was perfectly intact. She hadn't changed a single word of my structural sabotage. In her desperate battle with the developmental editors, she had fought tooth and nail to preserve the text exactly as I had written it, unknowingly defending the very weapon that would execute her. I bought the book in cash, kept the receipt, and walked out into the crisp afternoon air. The trap wasn't just set anymore. It was fully armed and ticking. The media tour began the following week. Vanessa was everywhere. I watched her on a prominent morning talk show while eating cereal on my futon. The host, a fiercely energetic woman in a bright yellow dress, held up the book like a holy text. Vanessa, the world you've created is incredibly dense. The mythology of the Ashlands, the specific mechanics of the blood binding, it feels so grounded. Where did you pull this lore from? Vanessa smiled, the practiced, humble expression she had rehearsed in front of a mirror 1,000 times. But her eyes were tight. She gripped the arms of her chair a little too hard. It just came to me. Honestly, I've always had a very vivid imagination. I wanted to explore the duality of power and sacrifice. But the specific names, the host, pressed, glancing at her notes. The warring families, the Hemlocks, the Drakes, the Oakhaven clan. It feels so localized. Is there a historical basis? Those were the street names of my childhood neighborhood in a dilapidated suburb of Chicago. Just playing with sounds, mostly. Vanessa stammered slightly, the smile cracking for a microsecond. I wanted names that sounded earthy, grounded. She survived the interview, but I saw the sweat glistening on her collarbone. She was walking through a minefield blindfolded. Every question about the lore, the geography, or the thematic resonance was a bullet whizzing past her ear. By week 3, Crown of Ash hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Vanessa posted a photo on Instagram of herself sitting on the floor of her new luxury Manhattan apartment, surrounded by flowers, crying perfectly photogenic tears. The caption read, "To everyone who believed in my words, this is for you." That was the trigger, the absolute pinnacle of her ascent. She couldn't climb any higher, which meant it was time for the drop. I didn't want to just leak it on Twitter. Social media outrage is a brush fire. It burns hot, but it moves fast, and people forget. Vanessa's PR team was expensive. They could spin a Twitter rumor into a narrative of jealous haters trying to tear down a successful woman. I needed a controlled demolition. I needed a journalist with teeth, an impeccable reputation, and a deep-seated hatred for industry fraud. His name was Liam Davies. He wrote long-form investigative takedowns for The Scrutiny, a digital magazine famous for destroying careers with meticulously sourced, legally bulletproof journalism. Liam didn't care about clicks. He cared about scalps. I sat at my desk and opened a new email. Subject: the structural plagiarism and complete ghostwriting of the #1 bestseller, Crown of Ash. I attached the time-stamped manuscript file. I attached the screenshots of her text messages from the day she submitted the decoy. I attached the receipt for the registered mail I sent to myself prior to her submission. Then I typed out the map. Mr. Davies. Vanessa Croft did not write a single word of her debut novel. If you look at every 5th chapter starting on page 42, the first letter of every sentence spells out my legal name and social security number. Furthermore, the political factions are mapped exactly to the street grid of my hometown in Illinois, a place Croft has never been. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with an icy, electric clarity. I thought about the hospital bed I never woke up in. I thought about the tire tracks on the wet pavement. I have security footage of her dropping an envelope of hush money at my apartment, I added. I am ready to go, on the record. I clicked send. The progress bar flashed across the screen, a tiny blue line, bridging the gap between my past and her future. The file uploaded. The screen refreshed. It was done. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the silence of the apartment, waiting for the first explosion. Liam Davies replied in 14 minutes. His email was brief, devoid of professional pleasantries. Meet me at the diner on 4th and Pike. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring the physical hardware. If this is a hoax, I will publicly humiliate you. I printed the email, folded it neatly into my jacket pocket, and packed my external hard drives into a heavy canvas backpack. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window of my cramped apartment, watching the city lights bleed into the thick, damp fog, rolling off the harbor. The anxiety that had plagued my previous life, the constant gnawing fear of being discovered of Vanessa's wrath, was entirely gone. In its place was a cold, mechanical focus. The diner smelled of burnt hash browns and industrial floor cleaner. Liam was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. He looked older than his author photo, his face lined with the deep grooves of someone who spent his life sifting through humanity's garbage. He wore a rumpled gray suit and had a heavily modified, thick-cased laptop open on the sticky Formica table. Beside him sat a younger man in a plain black hoodie, tapping rhythmically on a tablet. "Jade," Liam said, not standing up. He pointed a scarred finger at the booth seat opposite him. "Sit down. This is Greg. He's my security tech. Hand over the drives." I slid my backpack across the table. I didn't say a word. I pulled out the external hard drives, the sealed plastic bag containing the hush money, and the unopened registered mail package with the red postal stamp glaring across the seam. Greg took the drives and plugged them into a multi-port hub connected to his machine. His eyes flicked across lines of code that reflected in the diner's harsh fluorescent lights. "Tell me the story," Liam commanded, picking up a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee. "From the beginning. Don't leave out a single pathetic detail." "Why did you write it?" I told him. I stripped away my pride and laid out the ugly, embarrassing truth. I explained the College Lit magazine. I explained the ghost-written essays. I detailed the exact conversation in my apartment where I refused to rewrite the Obsidian Crown, and the subsequent trap I laid in the shared cloud folder. I didn't paint myself as a hero. I admitted I was petty vindictive and deeply angry. Liam listened in silence, his pale blue eyes locked onto mine. He didn't take notes. He just watched my face. "The hash values match," Greg murmured, suddenly, breaking the silence. He tapped the screen of his tablet. "The creation dates on these local files predate the publishing house's acquisition by 3 months. There's no evidence of tampering with the system clock. The keystroke logs are consistent with human generation. It's clean." Liam set his coffee mug down. The heavy ceramic clicked sharply against the table. "And the acrostic, page 42, I said softly. "Chapter 5. It runs through every 5th chapter until the end." Greg pulled up a digital PDF of the published novel, an advanced copy Liam had clearly acquired. He scrolled down. His eyes tracked the left margin. I watched his jaw slacken slightly. He pulled up a separate window, typing in my legal name and the social security number I had provided in the email. "Christ," Greg breathed. "It's perfectly mapped, letter for letter." Liam finally smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the expression of a wolf smelling blood on the wind. The PR firm representing her is notoriously aggressive. They will try to bury you. They will threaten lawsuits, defamation, the works. Are you ready for that? "They can't sue me for telling the truth," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "And they can't delete a social security number out of 300,000 printed hardcovers currently sitting on shelves across the country." Liam nodded slowly. He reached across the table and slid the sealed bag of cash back toward me. "Keep that. You might need it for rent. We publish on Tuesday at dawn." I spent Monday completely off the grid. I turned off my phone, unplugged my router, and deep cleaned my apartment until my hands smelled like bleach and lemon. I wanted a sterile environment for the fallout. Tuesday morning broke with a sharp, clear sky. At 6 a.m., I plugged my router back in. I opened my laptop and navigated to the scrutiny. The headline dominated the entire landing page in massive, heavyweight font. "The Ghost in the Machine. How Publishing's Golden Girl Faked a Masterpiece." Beneath it was a split-screen image. On the left, Vanessa's glossy, arrogant author photo. On the right, a raw, high-resolution scan of my computer screen, showing the original metadata of the manuscript side by side with a highlighted breakdown of the acrostic hiding in the published text. I clicked the link. Liam had outdone himself. He didn't just present the facts, he weaponized them. He tore apart the myth of the lone genius, exposing the industry's willingness to buy a pretty face over actual talent. He walked the reader through the digital forensics step by step. He included a Google Maps overlay, showing my childhood street names, perfectly mirroring the fictional political factions of the book. It was an execution by 1,000 undeniable facts. I opened Twitter. The hashtag Vanessa Croft was already trending at number 5. By 8 a.m., it was number 1 worldwide. The internet is a brutal machine when it finds a target. Book reviewers who had praised her prose just days ago were frantically deleting their videos and posting retraction statements. Readers were pulling their copies off the shelves, recording themselves, flipping to page 42, highlighting the first letters, and screaming in disbelief as my name materialized on the page. Vanessa's publisher went entirely lint. Her agent's website crashed from the sudden influx of traffic. At 10 a.m., her PR team released a desperate, panicked statement, claiming the allegations were a coordinated smear campaign by a disgruntled former acquaintance using manipulated digital files. They completely ignored the acrostic printed in the physical books. It was like watching someone try to put out a house fire with a water pistol. The comments underneath their statement were a massacre. Readers were posting photos of their physical receipts, demanding refunds. Other authors in the same genre, furious at the space she had stolen, began, quote, tweeting the article with absolute disgust. My phone finally rang at noon. It was an unknown number, but the area code was Manhattan. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a text arrived. Pick up the phone. Now. Please. I deleted the message and went to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. The coffee tasted incredible. Wednesday brought the structural collapse. The digital firestorm had burned through the brush and finally reached the load-bearing pillars of Vanessa's empire. At 9 a.m., Felix, her high-powered literary agent, released a brief, sterile statement on his agency's letterhead. He announced that he was parting ways with Vanessa Croft, citing irreconcilable breaches of trust and professional misrepresentation. He threw her completely under the bus to save his own reputation. 2 hours later, the publisher followed suit. They announced an immediate halt to all printing runs of Crown of Ash. They instructed retailers to pull the existing stock from the shelves and return them to the warehouse. More importantly, anonymous sources leaked to the trade magazines that the publisher's legal department was drafting a lawsuit against Vanessa for breach of the morality clause and blatant contract fraud, demanding the immediate return of the 7-figure advance. The money she had already spent on her luxury apartment, the money she had spent on designer clothes and aggressive PR retainers. It was gone. I worked my afternoon shift at the cafe. The mundane rhythm of grinding espresso beans and calling out names was the perfect counterbalance to the digital carnage I was orchestrating. Leo, the intern, practically vibrated behind the counter, reading aloud from his phone between every customer. They're calling it the biggest literary fraud since James Frey. Leo whispered, fiercely foaming a pitcher of oat milk. My boss said the publisher is out millions in marketing alone. She's ruined Jade, completely blacklisted. She won't even be able to self-publish under a pen name. I wiped down the steam wand. Actions have consequences, I murmured. My shift ended at 8 p.m. The rain had started again, a cold, driving drizzle that slicked the pavement and reflected the harsh neon signs of the streetlights. I stepped out the back door of the cafe into the alleyway, pulling my hood up against the damp chill. A figure stepped out from the shadows near the dumpsters. I stopped, my muscles instinctively locked tight. For a terrifying, fleeting second, the memory of the van headlights blazed behind my eyes. I forced myself to breathe. I was on the sidewalk. There were no cars here. It was Vanessa. She looked horrifying. The polished, untouchable aura of the best-selling author was entirely stripped away. Her honey-blonde hair was plastered to her skull by the rain hanging in stringy wet clumps around her face. She wore a heavy, expensive trench coat, but it was unbuttoned, revealing a stained, wrinkled t-shirt beneath. Her eye makeup had run down her cheeks, leaving dark, bruised-looking streaks against her pale skin. She stood blocking the exit of the alley, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. She was shaking. "You—" She choked out her voice, a raw, ragged rasp. It sounded like she had been screaming for hours. "You did this." I didn't move. I kept my distance, measuring the space between us. "I wrote a book, Vanessa. You stole it. The rest of this is entirely your own construction. You set me up." She lunged forward a single step, then stopped, her chest heaving. "You put those names in there. You put your social security number in there. You knew I wouldn't check. You knew I was desperate." "Yes," I said, smoothly, my voice barely above a whisper. The truth hung in the damp air between us, heavy and undeniable. "I knew exactly who you were. I just gave you the rope." She let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. She pulled her hands out of her pockets. Her knuckles were white. "They're taking everything. The apartment, the money. Felix won't even answer my calls. My parents are furious. They're talking about fraud charges, Jade. Prison. You signed a legal document claiming intellectual property that wasn't yours." I stated, feeling entirely detached. I was looking at a stranger. That is the definition of fraud. "We can fix this." She closed the distance between us, grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. Her fingers dug in desperately. "You can tell them it was a collaboration. You can tell them we had a verbal agreement, and you just got mad. I'll give you half the money. I'll give you all the money. Just call that journalist and retract it." I looked down at her hand, gripping my sleeve. I felt a surge of absolute disgust. I reached over, pried her fingers off my jacket, one by one, and dropped her hand back to her side. "You can't buy your way out of this," I said, stepping past her toward the street. "There is no rewrite for this draft. You owe me," she screamed, spinning around to face my back. Her voice cracked, echoing loudly down the brick walls of the alley. "I brought you into this world. I gave you the ideas. You were nothing before me." I stopped. I turned slowly to face her. The rain washed over my face, cold and clean. "You used me," I corrected softly. "You drained me for 5 years, stole my work, and left me to rot while you bought custom gowns and accepted awards you didn't earn. You thought I was weak. You thought I was stupid." I took a step closer, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "I died for your ego once, Vanessa. I'm not doing it again." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The fight completely drained out of her. She looked small, pathetic, a hollow shell of a person realizing the script was permanently lost. She crumpled backward, leaning against the damp brick wall of the bakery next door, sliding slowly down until she was sitting on the wet pavement. She pulled her knees to her chest and finally started to cry. Not the pretty photogenic tears for Instagram, but ugly guttural sobs that shook her entire frame. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel the sudden magical resolution the movies promise when the villain is defeated. I just felt tired. I turned my back on her and walked out of the alley, stepping onto the brightly lit sidewalk. The city buzzed around me. Cars hissing over the wet asphalt. People hurrying past with umbrellas. The world was moving forward. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and checked my email. There was a message from my new agent. The sci-fi manuscript had caught the attention of an editor at a highly respected independent press. They wanted to set up a call for Friday. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked toward the subway. The air smelled of wet concrete and exhaust fumes. It smelled like being alive. November brought the final necessary ugly phase of the demolition, the legal fallout. My involvement wasn't voluntary. I was subpoenaed as the primary witness in the publisher's massive fraud lawsuit against Vanessa. I didn't mind. I had nothing to hide, no lies to keep track of, and a meticulously organized file of evidence to back up every single claim I made under oath. The deposition took place in a sterile windowless conference room in a high-rise law office in Midtown. The air conditioning was cranked so high my knuckles ached. The room smelled of ozone from the heavy-duty copy machines down the hall and the bitter tang of stale catering coffee. I sat at one end of a massive mahogany table. Liam, the journalist who broke the story, sat 2 chairs down aggressively, typing on his thick laptop. Vanessa sat directly across from me. She was a ghost, the vibrant, arrogant girl who used to burst into my apartment demanding rewrites was gone. In her place sat a hollowed-out shell wearing a sensible, cheap, gray blazer. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, unforgiving ponytail. She had lost weight, but not in a glamorous way. It was the kind of weight loss that hollows out your cheeks and sharpens your collarbones, born from sleepless nights and a diet of sheer panic. She didn't look at me, not once. She kept her eyes fixed on the legal pad in front of her, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her lawyer, a sweating man with a cheap comb-over, spent 3 hours trying to poke holes in my timeline. He aggressively questioned the acrostic, implying I had hacked her computer to plant the evidence after the fact. "Ms. Gallagher," the lawyer barked, leaning across the table and pointing a pen at me. "Isn't it true that you had remote access to my client's cloud drive? You could have easily inserted this code into the manuscript on the day she submitted it." I leaned forward, mirroring his posture, but keeping my voice dead flat. "No, I didn't have remote access. We shared a specific folder. And as the digital forensics report clearly shows, the file containing the acrostic was created on my local encrypted hard drive 3 days before she copied it. You have the IP logs. You have the keystroke data. My hands typed those words. Hers didn't. The publisher's lead attorney, a terrifyingly calm woman in a bespoke suit, didn't even bother to look up from her paperwork. She knew the defense was drowning. "Can you confirm for the record?" the publisher's attorney finally asked, her voice cutting through the stuffy room. The social security number hidden in the text of Crown of Ash. I recited the 9 digits. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine. The sharp, clacking sound echoed like nails being driven into a coffin. Vanessa flinched at every number. A tiny, involuntary muscle spasm in her jaw. That was the only reaction she gave. The fight was completely gone. She was just waiting for the dirt to hit the lid. The lawsuit was settled out of court 3 weeks later. The details were technically sealed, but Leo, my favorite gossip intern at the cafe, fed me the entire breakdown over a shift change. Vanessa was forced to repay the entire portion of the advance she had received, plus a massive penalty for breach of contract and damages to the publisher's reputation. It completely wiped out her bank accounts. She had to sell the Manhattan apartment at a loss to cover her legal fees. She moved back in with her parents in the suburbs. A few weeks after that, she filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. She was completely erased from the industry. Bookstores quietly pulped their remaining stock of the novel. Her name became a cautionary tale, a punchline traded over drinks at publishing networking events. I stopped checking up on her after that. The debt was paid. The timeline was reset. Winter thawed into spring, and my own life quietly blossomed in the space she used to occupy. I signed the contract with the independent press for my sci-fi thriller, Orbital Decay. There was no 7-figure advance. There were no billboards in Times Square. My advance was modest, just enough to let me quit my second job at the cafe and focus on writing full-time. It was exactly what I wanted. The editorial process was grueling, but it was real. My editor challenged me, pushing me to deepen the character arcs and clarify the physics of my decaying space station. I fought for my sentences, negotiated cuts, and learned how to build a book with my own name on the cover. In late August, a heavy cardboard box arrived at my new apartment, a sunny, 1-bedroom walk-up that didn't smell like mold. I used a box cutter to slice through the packing tape. I pulled out the first author copy. The cover was gritty matte black with stark white typography. I ran my thumb over the spine. It felt heavy. It smelled of fresh ink and binding glue. There were no secret codes hidden in the text. There were no stolen street names. It was just my imagination, bound in paper. I held the book to my chest, closing my eyes. I waited for the phantom pain, the crushing weight of the van, the metallic taste of blood. I waited for the bitterness that had driven me for the past year. It wasn't there. The slate was completely wiped clean. I wasn't the ghostwriter anymore. I wasn't the victim on the rainy asphalt. I was just Jade. A week later, I had my launch party. It wasn't at a fancy gala. It was at the small, independent bookstore a few blocks from my apartment. Only about 30 people showed up. Friends, a few sci-fi bloggers, and Leo, who brought me a massive, overpriced latte. I stood at the wooden podium, looking out at the small crowd. I opened my book to the first chapter. I didn't need to look at the words. I knew them by heart. I took a deep breath of the dust-mote-filled air, grounded my feet firmly on the solid floor, and finally started to read my own story out loud. Some people think karma is a mystical force that balances the universe. I think karma is just a paper trail, a solid backup drive, and the patience to let a liar dig their own grave. Taking your life back doesn't look like a glamorous movie montage. It looks like setting boundaries, gathering evidence, and knowing exactly what your work is worth. If you loved watching this toxic empire crumble as much as I loved tearing it down, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to never let someone else steal their voice, and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Leave a comment below. Have you ever caught a friend lying to get ahead? See you in the next one.